All right, looks like we're ready to roll. Good and recording. All right, well, welcome everyone. We are on our third workshop in the Future of Improvement series where we're trying to spotlight and focus on today's demystifying digital transformation. Let's see if I can get the slide to move. There we go. So what is our agenda today? We're going to be talking about kind of what we're doing with the series, introduction into our mission, a little bit about ourselves. As you can see, there's only two of us. Normally we would have three. We'll get into that. Walk you through a little introduction in digital transformation, talk about some examples of what that looks like, what it is, what it isn't, the importance of that on the impact of what we're talking about today with digital transformation, what it can do for businesses. And then, excuse me, Eleanor will walk us through some potential pitfalls and what the future of digital transformation looks like. At the very end of the session, we'll do some Q&A and talk about kind of what's next. So we can get right into it then, talking a little bit about what this workshop series is all about and what our mission is. Ultimately, we're here to talk about the different tools and techniques that are used in improvement to give us, to give everyone some insight into what it looks like and how it kind of works and functions, and then ultimately how that can be used to accelerate improvement across different types of industries. In this space, we're talking about demystifying digital transformation. Previously, we talked about improvement trends across the industries and also systems thinking. And in the next series schedule, we will have a data and opportunity waste as well in the future. So a little bit about us. Unfortunately, my partner, Chuck Adams, is not able to make it today due to a family emergency. So a little bit about me. I'm Corbin Metz. I run the Coeptus Consulting Group with Chuck, and we are here to serve industrial manufacturers and service providers to help them improve their processes and really drive value into the supply chain. Ultimately, trying and focusing on digital transformation as well in our offerings. And we have a partner here, Eleanor, who I'll let her introduce herself a little bit.
Thanks, Corbin. So I'm Eleanor. I'm the principal of iSquare, which is a process improvement business based in New Zealand. So that's really focused on process and system improvement, improvement of quality management systems, data insight and operations, and also technology solutions. And I feel really lucky to have this partnership with Coeptus to do this workshop because what we've found is that like any process improvement, if you have a team, you get different insights and that benefit as a team. So it's really awesome to be part of this.
Absolutely, and likewise, Beck and iSquare as well. It's been a fun journey, and I'm sad to see that it's coming to a close fairly soon, for now at least. All right, we can get into the meat and potatoes of what we're here to talk about today. Ultimately, what are we talking about? What is digital transformation? Well, there's several different types of definitions out there. The one that I would like to draw attention to is really about the results of achieving certain business objectives that you get when you enable the right kind of IT change. And it's adopting that across more than just one specific area or pillar or function. It's aligned to different, it's on a system level aligned to operations that incorporate technology. Ultimately, it is not something that you can do in a silo. It is not something that tools and technologies may or may not help you with. They would only help if they're going to add value. It's not something that one person can do or one department can do or one project or program. unless you incorporate the feedback of all the kinds of stakeholders in your process. And ultimately, what it is not and what it should not be is just digitalizing existing processes. And we'll talk a little bit about what digitalizing looks like in the next couple of slides. But ultimately, digital transformation, if you want to take a look at the pyramid that we have built here, it starts with the customer experience. And it's really fundamental to understanding what your customer needs and where the value can be found. Building your operational processes then on top of that, and making sure that those are done at the right space at the right time, using those tools that are going to work for you. And then ultimately, your business model needs to adapt or adjust to what that looks like. It needs to be kind of taken from your customer and like a pull to use lean manufacturing terms, in a pull way, versus kind of from the top down, which is what traditional management tends to do. Working in the industrial manufacturing space is what Coeptus really focuses on, but I also want to open it up to Eleanor to see if she had any other thoughts in the food industry or in her specific area on this topic about digital transformation.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've observed, particularly in the last year, is an acceleration of moving towards all-encompassing technology solutions, and in businesses that traditionally only had certain parts of the business that had a really strong IT footprint. So, even 5 years ago, a lot of manufacturing was still paper-based recording, or in fact, like no recording. So there was no way of actually seeing what your downtime was. Whereas now there's a lot of tools available that enable you to get a lot of data on your manufacturing, on your operation. But there's other ways that you can use it as well, and quality management as well, in terms of doing processes in a different way, capturing data in a different way, and using that data to provide insight to your team as well. So it's got a lot of potential, and I think there's a lot more availability of software and tools now than there ever was before. But it is quite a daunting journey. So I think it's quite an exciting time, and in a way it's actually hard to know how it's going to go. So because I really feel like we're in the middle of it at the moment. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, I think, over the next few years.
Absolutely. I love how you said it's only going to continue to grow, and the word journey, because you're absolutely right. It's not something that you can do tomorrow or just, slap a Band-Aid on. These systems and tools are continuously improving and getting better all the time. So we don't know what the future holds, but we have ways of dealing with it, right? So with some of the things that we talked about with digitalization, let's talk about what the differences are here. Ultimately, if I can get the slide to change, we wanted to walk you through this kind of picture or idea in a couple examples here. So ultimately, the way that we see digitization is really the capturing of taking a paper process and then putting it into an IT system. That IT system then essentially is if you took like a business process that you would normally have a paper like manual or operation sheet in manufacturing or something like that, and then you're simply just scanning it into a document or scanning it into a system, sorry. That is kind of the first step, and it's fundamental. You absolutely need to do something like that in order to speed up a specific process. Going into digitalization, then, it's a matter of taking your business processes that might exist with paper process or paper documents and trying to then manipulate those paper processes into a digital process. The way we kind of see this is if you were to have some sort of an invoicing process, or maybe one department that does something with multiple people on a team, it can be digitalized by creating a kind of a digital twin of that process that already exists. And it would be done through a system of your choosing that's in the IT space that can then capture the data, and that data is then more available to you at that time. What we want to then demystify that is the difference between digitalization and digital transformation. Digital transformation is fundamentally taking the wing-to-wing process and looking at how you can make not only that information available in the right time at the right to the right people, but with the right tools in mind. And say you had a linear process that existed within a department, and then there's another department that has to take that information and do something else with it. Digital transformation will allow you to essentially break down all the barriers of the information and enable flow for that data to really go through and empower people to then use things like analytics in real time. Fundamentally, this stuff is kind of embedded into the culture. And so it really is not necessarily about the technology and all the cool tools, but rather what you're going to do with it and what kind of value you can add to your customer at the end of the day. If you're just throwing stuff on top of everything else by adding new tools and adding new screens, at the end of the day, you can have a piece of paper that will have 30 different software logins and all that kind of stuff. That's not really enabling any flow for everyone. So we wanted to kind of walk through a few examples in here of how we want to debunk the difference between those three words and how we see them going forward. There are quite a few other examples that could be used here, and I wanted to see if Eleanor had anything else to say about that.
I think that probably so first thing I'd say is you've covered it really well. I think one of the elements is that digital transformation can contain the other two steps, but it's actually about thinking a little bit more holistically than that. And I think, what we covered in the systems thinking elements as well comes into it, which I think we're talking about a little bit later as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really about a wholesale change, but it may use elements of the kind of simpler digitization and digitalization as well.
It is a tongue twister, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
A lot to say. Thanks, I appreciate that insight. Okay, so we've been talking about kind of what the different ones are. Now we want to kind of go through what is the importance and relevance to all of this. Kind of so what? So you have rapid disruption and innovation, essentially. Why is DT important? Well, when you don't address ever-changing change, as we've seen with a lot of impact that COVID has brought to several industries, when you stop the ability to actually physically go out and do things, and you're no longer able to do it in the way that you were able to do it before, it's common to fall into that, okay, well, we must stop, when in reality, digital transformation can enable you and accelerate you into different ways of doing business that are going to help with innovative ways to kind of continue to improve and compete within your specific industry. A good example of something that comes to mind in here is what happened with the video rental industry between what some may remember as Blockbuster versus now what is common as Netflix or Hulu or whatever streaming device you have, and it's continuously changing as well through all the different types of innovations that come out. At least there's opportunity with digital transformation that allows you to kind of continuously get better and improve for that reason. Now, when it's done properly, it can also be done, it's also way more efficient. So ultimately, the digital transformation can help accelerate and reduce the impact that the organization, the business, and the different processes have on the world, essentially. So the goal here is to do like full reduction of waste. When you think about lean management, it's about kind of reducing waste on a whole, and that includes the entire supply chain. If done properly, digital transformation should also consider its impact on the environment. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of provide some insight into is looking at it and reflecting on the systems thinking module is really understanding how what are your goals and what kind of impact you want to have. You have to understand what that roadmap looks like, because there could be additional costs that you aren't necessarily seeing if looking at it in a siloed way. In an experience that I've had in my past through university, I had the opportunity to study what I personally was very upset about, which was paper recycling. I'm a huge recycler, and ultimately I was asked to say why paper recycling is bad. Well, I didn't think it was at first, because everyone's been saying, you know, it's all great for you, but ultimately, when looking at the holistic system and seeing kind of what energy consumption, what carbon footprint you might have, and weighing the benefits versus the risks and impact to our environment, it is actually worse. So, so really the goal here is, if you can, to be more efficient, you have to, if you think about the 3 R's that we might have been taught in school at some point: reduce, reuse, and then recycle. And ultimately, we in organizations and departments tend to jump towards the recycling first, thinking it's going to be the most sustainable option, when it doesn't necessarily always work out that way. And then lastly, we wanted to kind of say that speed, accessibility, and availability of information is pretty key into what digital transformation can do. It allows you to be agile and responsive in real time, which has extremely impactful benefits to decision making, and flowing that information through organizations that may not traditionally be set up that way. And kind of referencing back to our pyramid that we talked about before, if you understand the customer's experience, work towards your processes to line up to those experiences, and then ultimately change your business model, the flow of information and a digital transformation is going to be a lot better. And then you'll have the ability to then respond. And everyone wants to be able to respond whenever there's any kind of disruptions, right? Eleanor, do you have anything else that you'd like to add? Because I know that there's quite a few things that you probably have seen in your experience as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that we talked about was really around those unseen costs as well of, you know, I think efficient, if done properly, is really also signaling that you need to be quite careful around what you put in terms of digital transformation. So in our next talk in this series, we're going to be talking about data waste. And one of the things that's previously I hadn't considered really until last year was actually, when you've got all these data centers that are capturing all this information that previously we weren't able to capture, what's actually the environmental footprint of capturing that data as well? So, you know, I think it goes back to your comment about reduce, reuse, and recycle. Big data is here, and we have the tools and technology to use big data, but is the value actually exceeding the costs of having that information, and is it kind of false security? So I think that's something that we're going to be able to talk about more in the next talk. But you know, there are unseen costs too if you don't get this right. But if you do get it right, it should enable you to do a lot of waste reduction through the reasons that Corbin mentioned around, you know, reducing barriers and obstacles between the departments talking to each other, having the ability to make decisions in real time, so you don't have time waste and things like that. So it's got enormous potential to really change the way that we do business.
Absolutely. I could not agree with that more. And I am very excited to talk in the future about data waste and opportunity, because there's a lot to unpack there as well. Okay, so kind of leading into that, we have some potential pitfalls.
Yeah. So it's we've kind of I kind of touched on it with my comments in the last slide, but really it's like anything, right? You have a new way of doing things, or a new paradigm that you're working to, such as digital transformation. There are pitfalls to any change that you make, and there's a few, and this slide captures some of them. So I'll step through each of them. So one is forcing a one-fits-all solution. So there are some big platforms out there. So one that I can think of is, for example, SAP, which potentially has the ability to do a lot of things in your business for you. And there's other software providers as well, so I'm definitely not picking on SAP, but there's really a trade-off between one system doing everything for you and then potentially not being specialists in all elements of it, versus having a few providers in your portfolio and having communication between those different platforms, but allowing them to kind of do what they do best. But there are trade-offs in that. So you don't want to force a one-fits-all solution where you're doing a lot of bespoke work to your one platform in order to do everything it needs to do for your business. But equally, you probably don't want to have 10 software platforms that are all expertly in all their elements, but you've got then essentially 10 nodes to connect to each other, which becomes an exponential problem pretty quickly. So there's really a need to determine what's going to be important for your business and really focus on kind of those key elements, and then kind of seek to minimize the number of platforms, but have specialization where appropriate. It's quite difficult. And I think as someone that's worked a little bit in this space, the answer is probably that you're not going to be able to do everything you want to do, but you sure want to focus on everything you need to do, and then try and be smart and agile within the software platforms that you have as much as possible. So don't continuously add, but equally don't make bespoke solutions where you can just buy one potentially off the shelf that does the same thing. So it's a really tricky trade-off, and I don't think there's an easy solve in that element, but certainly I think that's a big element of digital transformation. And having APIs now and the ability to hook into other systems data and also connect it up into data lakes actually brings me on to my next point, which is about not enough or too much data governance. So I think, Corbin, you'll be able to tell a good story about about data governance and how not having enough can be quite detrimental. And then also there's the other side where you can't actually get at the data because there's such strict security in place. So you're basically then funneling all of the data requests in the organization through about 10 people, which doesn't tend to work too well as well. So do you want to tell that story now, or would you like to tell it at the end?
Remind me of the story exactly.
Just around where you worked in a company where you had a data lake, but you couldn't trust the data necessarily.
Yes.
Because,
Yes. So I have worked for a business before where ultimately we were given training to access the data lake. The data lake is the source of truth, to say. However, everyone had access to it. And then whenever you went into any kind of queries or tables that existed out there, everyone would throw their hands up and say, oh, that's not mine, that's not right, that's not working. And so you get this empowerment that the IT system enables by allowing this information to be out there. However, the governance didn't exist. So ultimately, everyone was asked to do their own data governance. So no one trusted any of the data. It didn't match any of the systems. It didn't match any of the records or forecasting. And it's impossible to do anything predictively on that kind of information. So it's very laborious, challenging, and not effective way of managing what they were calling digital transformation at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've certainly had the opposite experience where it was so locked down and so not available that then you end up with the side effect of people find ways to collect their own data, and they have their own unofficial data sources, which kind of then goes back to the not enough governance problem. So there's side effects, I guess, from how you provision data for other people to use. And you have to think really carefully about that, because people want to be able to make decisions. People want to be able to get work done. And so they will find ways to do that if you don't make it easy for that to happen. And it's a kind of interesting, because again, it kind of leads on to the next one, which is a big thing for me about when you bring in big change, and particularly with computers, because I mean, let's face it, they're a strange conceptual machine where you've got tiny on and off switches that then somehow make all of the fantastical, wonderful technology that we have today. I mean, it's sort of a bit of a mind bender, really, how computers work. And so it's not just in computing where change is sometimes done to people rather than with them. So they don't have a chance to have a say in terms of what's decided to be done, or they don't even have a chance to kind of talk about how it impacts them and have that used in the design, or have that used to kind of revise the design. And I think because computers are a strange concept in a way, like if you really think about how a computer works, like I said, it's not going to be easy or obvious to people. Like people understand that they use applications and that kind of thing, but because of that, it's super important that you take people on this journey, and that you do have some patience around that, adapting to these new ways of working. And you'll find it's a bell curve. Some people love it, they lap it up, they want to do it, they're super keen. Then you'll have most people in the middle where they'll kind of wait and see how it goes. And then you'll have people who are, at the other end of the bell curve where they're really going to struggle. And it's about thinking carefully about how you help those people, and also potentially how you listen to them, because they might have some potentially quite valuable feedback as well. And the last one is really about digital transformation. So where you're dressing something up as a wholesale, large-scale change when it's not really that at all, kind of going back to what Corbin said in the first kind of meaty slide 5, where you're actually doing digitization. So you're taking a current manual process and you're just making it into a process for the computer. And if that's not a very good process to begin with, and you just digitize that, you're going to lose people through the process. And in fact, you might actually make it worse, because they've probably found ways to work around a not very good manual process. Whereas if you set in place blocks and workflows with the IT process, you may actually make people's lives considerably worse than they currently are now. So it's, all of these things really, I guess, are about thinking carefully about how the changes that you're thinking about doing impact the people in the business, and really being able to have some open discussion around what you're thinking about doing. One of my favorite things is always piloting. How can you test it in a small scale and learn? How can you empower people to own some of the changes so that you're not doing it all yourself? And really having that ability to have that agility and learn is so important. Corbin, do you have anything else you'd like to
Yeah.
add to the slide?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, or you try to maybe the peg in the round hole. I don't know, whichever analogy works best here, but ultimately, yes, it's a lot of effective communication being done to versus with. And one way that I'd like to offer to help with those types of challenges are ways of getting around that is really open dialogue and making visibility to what people own in what part of the process, improving that process in a digital way, ultimately giving people either swim lanes or mapping things out visually that really help provide some sort of matrix or structure around something that they might not even be aware of exists outside of their one little niche area. And a lot of times when you have digital processes and systems, these things exist in the quote unquote ether. People don't get to see or interact with them like they do in manual processes. So creating more transparency is very important and effective to help avoid some of those pitfalls. Essentially taking it in the journey sense of the way, and not just a one and done project to project kind of thing. It's something that everyone has to get on board with, and the more transparency and empowerment and kind of admitting that these pilots, like you mentioned, are either doing well or they were a miserable failure, you're still learning something from that. And it's effective to take on those risks in order to see where your business can go very quickly. So I think that that's ultimately a wonderful way to kind of help get the juices flowing when it comes to how management is managing versus how some other people in the organization may see something that's happening to them. But I will give it back to you for what's next.
Awesome. Thanks, Corbin. That was really, really good insight as well. And, you know, it is such an opportunity. And, you know, when preparing this slide, it was a really interesting question, like what next with digital transformation? Like some of the other presentations we've done, it's been actually a bit easier to be able to see that, but in a way, I can't see it. So what I did was had a look in terms of what other people might be thinking is next. And actually there wasn't an awful lot out there, which was really interesting. So it kind of potentially tells you that we're really in the middle of quite a significant change and it hasn't settled yet. So it's not settled how it's going to go. But certainly what we thought would then be important is to understand what elements are going to be important, which we've talked about really with the potential pitfalls. But this slide kind of seeks to kind of do the upside or you know, how do you best take advantage of digital transformation and the opportunity that presents. So that's really about our favorite systems thinking. So it's really about thinking about the scope of what you're trying to do adequately. So in systems thinking, we talked about how you can get quite focused on, you know, almost a band-aid solution or fixing one part of the process and not thinking about the whole. Digital transformation demands that you think about the whole system and you think about all stakeholders. And to Corbin's earlier point, you want to particularly be focusing on your customer first because it's really about delivering value. And I think I read a really interesting post the other day on LinkedIn about what should your focus be? Should it be profit? Should it be customer value? All these kind of things, or should it be your people? And one of the people actually said that I think it might have been the author, said they were really disappointed because people didn't come as the first thing. And it's an interesting challenge, isn't it? Because a business is a collection of people. So one of your primary stakeholder really has to be your people, because they're the people that have to use the technology to deliver value to the customers.
Mhm.
So it's an interesting lens, and one that I think sometimes is left behind when we're introducing change is we kind of say that people have to do it because that's what we've decided to do, but actually we need to do something that serves the people that are having to use this technology every day, which kind of goes to the next point around learning loops, testing assumptions, and fast revisions. You want to engage your team in the process of learning and in the process of adapting to new technology, and then using that technology to also adapt what they're doing in the business, because a lot of what digital transformation seeks to do is actually to break things down into, ironically, it's a system-wide change, but it's actually then about breaking things down into little parts that you test and change and learn from, and then adapt your business towards what you're learning every day. So it's really important to get used to that, and certainly there's approaches like agile and stuff that really have been quite a significant change in the IT industry over the last, I guess it's about 20 years. But really, these things aren't new. Like PDCA has been around for a very, very long time. So Plan, Do, Check, Act is not new. And actually, if you think about the way that children behave, they do lots of mini tests all the time. They're always experimenting and seeing, and that's actually how we learn. And the process of business almost in a way takes away our innate ability to just experiment and learn, because we don't want to get in trouble or do the wrong thing, or we become risk adverse. So it's really about connecting back into that. And then really, I think, the next one is actually about thinking big. So it kind of goes back to the same thing. If you've got to be willing to, don't just make incremental changes all the time. I mean, that's important, and continuous improvement is about daily incremental change. But digital transformation is about fundamental change. So you want to have a really awesome vision of what it could be, and not just digitalize your manual processes. Is really think hard about what that technology is going to enable you to do. And of course, underpinning these, and something that I kind of spoke to in the systems thinking element, was really about developing your team's competency and capability. They're fundamental to how digital transformation is going to go at your business. And also it should really inform how your digital transformation works entirely. And taking them on that journey, having strong change management processes, helping people become more like digital natives, and so that they're comfortable with the changes, or at least sufficiently comfortable with the changes that are happening, so that they want to adapt to the new ways of doing things. So I think it represents amazing opportunity, and over the next couple of years, I'm really looking forward to seeing what changes take place as a result of all of the digital transformation programs that I certainly see and hear are out there now. Corbin, would you like to add anything at this point as well?
Not too much. I think you really covered a lot. I mean, ultimately, we could probably talk for hours about these particular subject matters, but it is kind of interesting to kind of reflect on what you said. You have to do little loops and trying to learn and experiment, but then we also have to think big and be disruptive. And so balancing that risk with reward, and having that team that's getting developed towards their capabilities and their competencies, coming together with that system level business model is really key into understanding kind of where we're going to be going with this. Because as you had said, PDCA is an old term, and I hadn't really thought about that before, but agile is this new and fun little way of doing things, but the concepts are borrowed. They're just applied in a specific technology that we hadn't seen before. It's a new technology. And so kind of debunking the differences between new technology and new ways of doing things with things that have been around and things that have been tested. It's a very interesting kind of fabric that we have to navigate within our our own businesses, and then taking it beyond that into our customer base and with our suppliers in mind as well.
Yeah,
Very
that's
cool.
a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are now actually at the finish of workshop 3 in terms of the content, which is really exciting. I can't believe that we've done 3 workshops now, and we're going to be on to our last one, data, opportunity or waste, in 2 weeks' time, which is just like, I'm so excited about that one. It's one of my favorite topics, talking about data. Being a data science student myself, it's just, yeah, it's such an area of opportunity and also such an area of frustration for so many people. So we're really excited to talk about that. And Corbin and Chuck both have really interesting knowledge and experience to share in that. So I really can't wait to talk about that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so questions is going to be interesting today. Yeah, so Corbin, do you have any questions?
I do. I actually have a question. I was kind of thinking about this ultimately. For those on the phone, the Q&A is open during this time if you have anything that you'd like to ask us. Ultimately, I have a question for you, Eleanor. If I'm in a business as a non-manager, what would you suggest for enabling digital transformation at my business? If I don't have the authority to do anything about it, what do I have available to me to help with digital transformation? Is it taking digitization and digitalization and then building it up? Or what are your thoughts around that? I mean, ultimately there's a lot to climb that mountain.
It's a really interesting question. I think for me, probably the first thing I'd say is actually bring a good attitude towards it is actually the probably the most important thing. Is, you know, if you're interested in getting on board digital transformation, that's awesome. But ultimately, it is going to be a decision that's made as an organization. So senior leadership really need to get on board with digital transformation and want to do it, because it's not something that you can sort of half-pie do. You're really going to be wanting to look hard at how you're doing things as a business. I think where an individual can contribute is making sure that they have a really good understanding of how their processes work, what they do, what they like and don't like about their current processes, and what causes them pain. So what's that question of what's your biggest pain point? And also, what do you see as the biggest opportunity to serve your customers better? How can you better serve your customers? What frustrates you that you can't currently do that you'd really like to be able to do in order to do your job more effectively, or for the business to serve, like I say, its customers better?
That's great insight. I mean, definitely it's difficult for many to articulate at times, but when you really think about, like, okay, well, we could take and just, simply map out what works, what doesn't work, what could be improved, who can be involved in it, and really leading with that attitude, I think is probably the best way to make that impact. Great insight. I agree. That's wonderful.
Yeah. My question to you, Corbin, would be, what are you most excited about in terms of digital transformation?
I am most excited. That's a great question. How much time do we have? No, just kidding. I would say, let me think. The most exciting part of digital transformation to me is I guess, the journey itself. And ultimately, what that means to me is having a team that you can identify everyone's everyone's value on the team, and reduce all the waste and inefficiencies for the customer, and really doing that as a team. If you were I guess I could reference like a sports in this case, like you can't win a game if your goalie isn't in the thing. If you're a soccer player, football is bad. I actually don't do sports, so this is a bad analogy, but but it's there's no I in team. I'll use that reference. Ultimately, digital transformation and the way that we're working, COVID disrupted so much in that if you had a physical or brick and mortar type thing, you can't necessarily do that anymore, the business the way it was. But it really does force us to think about, how do we do things better? How do we do things easier? What is the cost of that? This is too expensive. And generally, when you consider like the cost of something and really start breaking it down, you get a lot of pain out of those costs too. And if you have a team that's really on board and organized to where the customer is really finding the most value from your products and processes and services, then services, then ultimately I think it's a journey that everyone can play along with, and they feel welcome and empowered to come to work. And ultimately that's what everyone wants, right? To make a difference in what they're doing and to be a part of a team. So digital transformation, I think, is that, and hopefully the future really brings that to light with some people who may not have those competencies or capabilities right now, and the teams are developing and working and helping support them in those types of developments. So that's my thoughts.
Awesome.
Do you have any insights on that too? It's a good question, Eleanor.
Yeah, I guess it's the potential for me, and what I loved about your comment was that there's the potential to make people's lives better, and that's always the motivation with improvement, isn't it? Ultimately, is making things better, and particularly making things better for people. And I think it's going to be quite a journey for a lot of people. It's going to be painful at times, but actually, if done well, it really represents an opportunity for pretty wholesale change, which I think is awesome, and seeing the innovation that's available now that wasn't available 3-5 years ago is pretty cool, like seeing what these clever kids basically develop in terms of software technology, and what people dream up in terms of what's available is just wild, really. It's so amazing. So for me, it's then about how do you connect that to people's potential and make things better. So yeah, awesome.
Great.
Yeah, it's been a great chat today. Really great to talk to you about it, Corbin, and hopefully delivered value to people watching this video. So yeah, really appreciate people's time today, and yeah, please get in touch with us if with the contact details on the screen. And if you have any questions or want to talk anything through further, we're I'm sure more than happy to do that.
Absolutely. Always excited to talk about these things and future opportunities. Hopefully we did demystify what digital transformation is and where it's going to be going for future improvement. And I thank you very much for your time and insight today, Eleanor. It's been a pleasure working with you on the series and in this session. So we'll hope to see Chuck next time, and hope to see everyone also in the next workshop for data waste and opportunity. How do I?